president's actions will reverberate here in Canada and across the world.
Canada hits back. Prime Minister Mark Carney says Canada will respond by matching U.S. auto tariffs.
Plus, stock markets in Canada and the U.S. plunged today as investors reacted to the latest tariffs from President Donald Trump.
And we're live outside the Stellantis plant in Brampton. There's already fallout from the U.S. auto tariffs, with Stellantis idling its assembly plant in Windsor for 2 weeks.
We're also live outside the GM plant in Oshawa tonight, where there's also plenty of uncertainty on the production line.
You're watching Live at 5.
Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Beatrice Faisman.
And I'm Lena Latafat. Thanks for joining us and welcome to Live at 5. Canada is pushing back against auto tariffs imposed by the U.S.
We must respond with both purpose and force.
After U.S. President Donald Trump announced a 25% tariff on autos yesterday, Prime Minister Mark Carney says Canada will match the move. It means a 25% counter tariff on American-made vehicles that are not compliant with the Canada-U.S.-Mexico trade agreement.
CP24's Lindsay Biscaya joins us live with more on Canada's response. Strong words from the Prime Minister today, Lindsay.
Strong words, and many, I think, would agree, strong action as well when it comes to these retaliatory measures on the latest retaliatory tariffs from the U.S. So as you mentioned, that 25% tariff on all imported vehicles from the U.S. that are compliant with CUSMA, that's that agreement between Canada, U.S. and Mexico. If the vehicles are not compliant with CUSMA, then the tariff can be, or are compliant rather, then the tariff can be reduced by the percentage of Canadian or Mexican parts within that vehicle. So there's a little bit of a specific there. Now, Carney also said these tariffs will not include vehicles imported from Mexico at all because Mexico has been compliant with CUSMA. And he also spoke more specifically about the fact that these tariffs will not affect auto parts. Here's more on what the Prime Minister had to say.
Our tariffs, though, unlike the U.S. tariffs, will not affect auto parts because we know the benefits of our integrated production system. And they will also not affect vehicle content from Mexico, who is respecting the CUSMA agreement. And as well, we are developing a framework for auto producers in Canada to get relief from these counter tariffs as long as they maintain their production and investment in our country.
So definitely trying to hit back where it hurts when it comes to these retaliatory measures. Carney also said that the government is challenging these tariffs in court. He says they have been illegally imposed under U.S. law. Carney took questions today after this address, Lena and Beatrice, and in one of his answers, he was talking about whether the U.S. would go back on these measures. And he said he believes that until Americans really start to feel the pain of these tariffs, he doesn't see the Trump administration walking back these measures anytime soon. So we're in it for the long run. And that was actually a sentiment that appeared to be echoed today by U.S. Secretary of Commerce Howard Lutnick. Take a listen.
This is a reordering of global trade for the benefit of America. These people have all been living in our house. They've been driving our car. They come by and visit, open our fridge, and eat our food whenever they want. They've taken advantage of us. Today was the day of the beginning of saying, I'm sorry, you can't just live for free off of us. You have to pay. And what's going to happen is the United States of America will get stronger. Our economy will grow much, much faster than the rest of the world.
And that, of course, seems to be the reason for Donald Trump implementing these tariffs, as he says that the U.S. has been disrespected for far too long by far too many countries. Now, we're looking at images here of auto plant workers, and obviously we've already seen the impacts of this on the auto manufacturing sector in Ontario, specifically Stellantis in Windsor, that plant temporarily shutting down for a couple of weeks because of these tariffs. And Mark Carney, addressing that today, said 3,600 workers are now out of a job as a result of that. So he said every dollar raised from these tariffs, which could be $8 billion before remission, will go directly back toward workers and companies of these tariffs. He said his government is also creating a framework, Beatrice and Lena, for auto producers to get relief in this country so long as they keep production and investment in this country as well. Back to you.
A lot to follow. Lindsay Biscay reporting live from our newsroom. Let's go to Queen's Park now, where Doug Ford earlier today had a virtual meeting with Prime Minister Mark Carney and the other premiers.
Yeah, the premier vowed to keep the province's retaliatory measures in place, demanding zero tariffs from the U.S. Among those measures include keeping U.S. alcohol off LCBO shelves. That's something Doug Ford has explored before, and banning American companies from approximately $30 billion in provincial contracts.
We just finished our FMM call with the Prime Minister, had the discussions regarding President Trump's comments yesterday. You know, we all agreed that we got the best of a bad deal, which in my opinion is still totally unacceptable. The only thing that's acceptable is zero tariffs. We're going to continue targeting zero tariffs. I do believe, and I would support retaliation tariffs, very similar to what they have against us in the auto sector, but that is strictly up to the Prime Minister.
And as Lindsay noted, there's already fallout from the U.S. auto tariffs, with Stellantis idling its assembly plant in Windsor for the next 2 weeks.
We're joined live now by CTV Windsor's Michelle Molesky, who's been following these developments all day. Michelle, good to see you. Thanks for joining us again. It's hard for auto workers where you are not to take this personally, Michelle.
I'm glad you asked me. That's a great way to put it. You know, hearing Mr. Lutnick's words there, I think anyone who works in the Canadian auto sector and quite frankly across Windsor-Essex is going to be highly offended for them to say that the auto sector belongs to the Americans and that Canadians have never been working at this for over 100 years. But that being said, I think, emotions are pretty high here in Windsor today. It's difficult to it's difficult for your largest employer to be idled for 2 weeks. And just to give people perspective on that, the spin-off jobs on this is where that big impact comes. Got new numbers today from the automotive parts manufacturers. So across Canada, 120,000 Canadians work directly in the auto sector. That translates to 460,000 Canadians who are working in related fields. That doesn't even consider the spin-offs of the restaurants, the grocery stores, the movie theaters, the tourist operators that can operate in communities like Windsor, like Oshawa, like Brampton, because we have a thriving economy. So when you pull out 4,000 people and tell them that they won't be working, they don't do any of those extra things. And I think that's sort of where our concern comes right now, is the uncertainty, the fear. The union has been telling their members for weeks, stop spending any money, save what you can, keep food on the table. We'll get through this together, but very, very uncertain times ahead.
Very much so, Michelle. I mean, when you talk about the uncertainty and being in limbo, these workers now know there's a 2-week temporary layoff. It's what happens after those 2 weeks that I think is causing even more anxiety within them. What are you hearing from the union, from the workers today, Michelle, and the ripple effect on the economy? Because as you mentioned, these union workers potentially aren't going to the restaurants to, have a great night out with their family. They're not spending their money in the local economy, and it has tremendous impact.
You're absolutely right. I personally know of, half a dozen couples where the husband and the wife both work in the factory. So now you've got both incomes that are up in the air. The workers that my colleague Stephanie Mazzotti chatted with today outside of the factory are sharing these feelings, fear, uncertainty. Everyone's scared. We don't know what's going on. It's very tense in the factory. One of the people also telling us that there's talk on the shop floor of shift smoothing. So that would be where if I'm on the first shift, I work for 2 weeks, and then I go on layoff for 2 weeks, and the second shift works. To me, that sounds really like the union trying to spread it out and to even the blow, shall we say, to across the workers. The union says it's more in the 4,000s that work there. And there had been big hopes of bringing back the third shift here in Windsor. We're currently only running on 2. So this just puts, for those workers who are waiting to get the call to go back to work on the third shift, all of this puts those hopes on the back burner. And so I guess to sum it up, to try to be positive, the mayor is saying we've been through this, Windsor, where where, the first in, we're the last ones out. But Windsor has this ability to just get through it together, to focus on each other, and to really support one another as we move through the ongoing ups and downs of the automotive industry. But for sure, a very tense, emotional day today.
All right, CTV's Michelle Molesky joining us live from Windsor tonight, talking about that impact. Good to have you on, Michelle. Thank you for this. And the future of production at the Stellantis Brampton assembly plant, that's also incredibly uncertain.
Let's go live now to CP24's Arda Zakarian, who is outside the plant tonight. Arda, that plant is kind of in a holding pattern. It's got some retooling going on, so I can't imagine a lot of activity. But what are you hearing when it comes to the impact on Stellantis in Brampton?
Well, people are worried, pausing production here, pausing the retooling in order for powertrain reasons. That's what the company has told its members. That coupled with the tariffs, of course, people are worried because the plant is in a very vulnerable position. But let's just touch on what's happening in Windsor as well as in the United States. So we know the Windsor plant paused for 2 weeks because of the tariffs. We know that there's layoffs, immediate layoffs, 900 people laid off from Stellantis in the plants from Indiana and Michigan. Premier Ford said he didn't think it would come this quickly. He thought maybe we would have at least a week until we saw the effects of the tariffs on directly affecting these plants. Here's more from him.
And I've been saying all along, I thought it would last about a week, but obviously it's right down to days now on the supply chain. And I've been saying this over and over again, a tariff on Canada is a tax on Americans. I mentioned termination day. There's a perfect example. That's just one company, one sector, not to mention all the other sectors. If they continue wanting to go after our lumber is used for housing in the U.S. It's a high-grade lumber, and that's just going to drive the cost up of housing. If they continue to go after the auto sector, it's going to drive the cost up of autos for Americans.
And the president of Unifor Local 1285 spoke to me earlier on the phone. He told me that if the company says it's in fact for powertrain reasons why they paused the retooling here, then why was everybody removed from the plant? Almost nobody works here. So that puts the plant in a very vulnerable position. And now adding that up with the tariffs, they're very, very concerned. But he did say that they will do whatever it takes to protect their members. And they just want to do what they do best, and that's build cars. He says that we will build cars in Brampton. Again, it's just a matter of when. And Premier Ford said that not only he, but the whole province, the country, will support the auto workers. We have yet to see a detailed plan for that, but we'll be waiting. Back to you.
Arda Zakarian live in Brampton for us. Thanks so much, Arda. Let's go to Oshawa now, where there is plenty of uncertainty on the production line at the General Motors plant there.
CP24's Sija Liu joins us with more from outside the plant on Park Road. Sija, what are you hearing?
Lena, Beatrice, well, the good news is, unlike Windsor, despite all this uncertainty, General Motors has not announced any plans to pause production at its plant in Oshawa. And despite this, believe it or not, the mayor of Oshawa, Dan Carter, says there is actually optimism amongst workers here in the city. And he points to the diversity of the plant. He says they make several products here, and he thinks their diversity is their strength, that they can do a lot here. And he also points to history. He says the city, the workers here, they've weathered the storm in the past. And he points to 2018 when President Trump back then also tried to pull manufacturing to the U.S. And he points to the long history between GM and Unifor and the challenges they've had throughout. And he says they have always found a solution. And he is hoping that this will be the same case when it comes to the tariffs. Now, the auto industry is a huge driving factor for the economy here in Oshawa. Just this plant alone, General Motors hires over 3,000 people, and then there are thousands of jobs as well that spin off from that. But there is still a lot of uncertainty, with the mayor saying changes are happening day by day. Here's more of some of the things he's still unsure about. Take a listen.
We're all trying to figure this out because it seems like we're going to do this, but nobody really understands what they're doing. So we understand the amount of U.S. content that goes into the product that we produce here in Oshawa. Is it only on the content that's not specifically American made and it's only Canadian? Is that where the tariffs are coming in? We're still looking for clarification. I don't have the answer to that. I'm sorry, I wish I did, but it keeps on changing hour to hour, and that's part of the frustration. We cannot run businesses on unpredictability.
And the union representing some of the workers here have certainly been preparing in advance. Just last week, Unifor Local 222 held a Elbows Up rally where they gathered other unions across the country, along with the Unifor president, to talk about their unified plan to tackle these tariffs. But now that these tariffs have, in fact, come into place, they will still be working on that plan as they try to figure out solutions. But the good news here so far, Lena, Beatrice, is that no plans yet to shut down or pause production.
All right, everybody holding their breath. Sija, thanks so much for this. Sija Lu, live in Oshawa this hour for us. It's 5:15, 17 degrees out there. You're watching Live at 5.
Well, Donald Trump's latest tariff announcement is rocking the markets this afternoon. The worst day, actually, on the market since the COVID-19 pandemic crashed the economy back in 2020. We'll have reaction coming up.
Welcome back. Stock markets in Canada and the U.S. plunged today as investors reacted to the latest tariffs from U.S. President Donald Trump. The U.S. stock market lost $3 trillion in value today.
The U.S. president was asked about it this afternoon as he was leaving the White House. Listen.
I think it's going very well. It was an operation, like when a patient gets operated on, and it's a big thing. I said this would exactly be the way it is. We have $6 or $7 trillion coming into our country, and we've never seen anything like it. The markets are going to boom, the stock is going to boom, the country is going to boom, and the rest of the world wants to see, is there any way they can make a deal?
The TSX and the Dow both dropped around 4%. For more on what the markets did and the overall economic picture, we're joined live by Sherry Cooper, chief economist with Dominion Lending Centers. Sherry, thanks so much for making time for us. I want to just jump off of what we heard from the U.S. president. He said the markets are going to go boom. Well, actually, they went kaboom today, the worst day since the COVID crash. What do you make of what you're seeing?
Well, I'm not surprised, and most economists were predicting that this kind of uncertainty and major disruption is reducing consumer and business confidence. No one likes this kind of uncertainty. And the volatility that we're seeing has been man-made. I mean, this isn't a natural disaster. So this is going to continue to be a period of significant uncertainty because we don't know what these tariffs mean. We don't know how long they will last. And we really don't know what our own position ought to be in terms of how it affects each of us individually, because this is hurting consumers. And when consumers feel a sense of unease, they stop shopping, or they certainly dial down what they buy. And that kind of thing leads to recession. There's no question about it. We're headed for a recession, unfortunately.
And when you say we are headed for a recession, are you talking about Canada and the U.S. along with other countries?
Well, I'm certainly talking about Canada, but I think that country after country around the world will feel a precipitously negative impact once these things actually begin to churn through. Businesses now are so uncertain, they're just on hold and needing to try to determine what's the best route. But we'll see layoffs, we'll see slowdowns, and we'll see this ripple through the economy, unfortunately.
Certainly the president's got the markets in a chokehold right now, and we heard from the Commerce Secretary that he's not going to be backing down. In light of that, Sherry, we heard from Prime Minister Carney today, if the U.S. won't lead world trade, Canada will. Are we in position to do that?
Well, certainly the U.S. is our number one consumer, foreign consumer, and we're the largest market for the United States. It works both ways. So if we stop buying or slow the buying, especially of U.S. products, as many Canadians are already doing, that inevitably hurts the U.S. Now, trade is 20% of our economy and only 12 or 13% of the U.S. economy. So we feel it much more dramatically than the United States. But that's always been the case.
And those fears of a recession getting more real every single day. Sherry Cooper, chief economist with Dominion Lending Centers. Thanks so much for coming on the show. We appreciate your take on this.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
It's 5:22, sitting at 17 degrees in the city. You're watching Live at 5.
Coming up, Premier Doug Ford is heading to Orillia tomorrow. He's going to take a firsthand look at the destruction from last weekend's ice storm. We'll tell you more about that planned visit.
Premier Doug Ford will be in Orillia tomorrow to tour the destruction from last weekend's ice storm.
The Premier will be joined by his ministers of emergency preparedness and energy as thousands remain without power in the area. He'll meet with residents impacted and thank frontline workers and volunteers working to clear debris and get things back to normal.
Everyone from Windsor, Hydro to all the way up, all the GTA and in Toronto. We've reconnected over 800,000 homes, and we still have right around about 190,000 more to go. We're working full out. Again, we have the teams out there from emergency management, the Ontario Corps, warming centers, food's brought in.
And in Peterborough, there are thousands of people there still without power. The city is operating several warming centers for those impacted by the ice storm and is offering a $75 benefit to residents to cover storm-related expenses. It's also waiving permit requirements so people can remove damaged trees from their properties.
Hydro One have been bringing in extra crews here in Peterborough, and they're restoring power as fast as they can. We dodged a bullet last evening. We thought the Peterborough area would get another drenching of freezing rain. Fortunately, it was just regular rain and a bit of wet snow, so that was helpful in terms of addressing a situation that is still pretty stressful, pretty difficult for a lot of people in our community.
And we had a chance to talk to Hydro One about the restoration efforts today and also talked about the impact of yesterday's wild weather on these efforts.
Crews made tremendous progress. So I know before the weather started, we had 190,000 customers without power across the province. And this morning we wake up with that same number. There were, again, the additional outages, and there were customers restored in the Southwest at that time as well. So it does become challenging when you have compounded weather events to sort of slice up the numbers. But, they made tremendous progress, and we hope that will continue today.
And Toronto Hydro is among the utility providers helping with the restoration efforts and has sent a crew of about 70 workers to help get the power back on in these impacted communities. There are also crews helping from Quebec and Saskatchewan.
It's now 5:27, 17 degrees. This is Live at 5.
Home sales in the GTA fell more than 20% in March. We'll take a closer look at the numbers after the break.
Welcome back. Home sales in the GTA fell 23.1% in March as more supply hit the market.
Yeah, the Toronto Region Real Estate Board says just over 5,000 homes were sold last month compared to more than 6,500 in March last year. The board says more than 17,000 new properties were listed in the GTA last month. That's up over 28% compared to last year. Treb says many buyers are likely taking a wait-and-see approach given the economic uncertainty caused by the ongoing trade war.
We've already seen some cuts on the part of the Bank of Canada, so obviously that's helpful from a affordability perspective. They've also benefited from more choice in the market, more negotiating power, and so we've seen the average price come off a little bit too. That's all well and good, but now people are concerned about, what's my employment picture going to look like as we move forward? What's my income picture going to look like as we move forward? And, as we saw yesterday, there's still a lot of uncertainty in terms of, trade disputes, tariffs, and how that's going to look, both south of the border and north of the border as we consider action on our front. And I think people need more certainty before they're prepared to pull the trigger.
The average selling price of a home decreased 2.5% to $1,093,000.
It is 5:31. You're watching Live at 5.
Canada hits back. Prime Minister Mark Carney says we will respond by matching U.S. auto tariffs, and the sector in Canada is on edge. Stay with us.
Canada hits back with Prime Minister Mark Carney saying Canada will respond by matching U.S. auto tariffs.
And stock markets in Canada and the U.S. plunged today as investors reacted to the latest tariffs from President Donald Trump. We'll tell you more about the numbers. They're not looking good.
And we're live outside the Stellantis plant in Brampton. There is already fallout from the U.S. auto tariffs, with Stellantis idling its assembly plant in Windsor for 2 weeks.
Plus, we are also live outside the GM plant in Oshawa tonight, where there is plenty of uncertainty on the assembly line. We'll take you live there for the latest reaction.
You're watching.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us. I'm Lena Ladefat.
And I'm Beatrice Faisman. Welcome to Live at 5. Well, Canada is pushing back against auto tariffs imposed by the U.S. Here's more from the Prime Minister.
We must respond.
Someone's key is
with both purpose and force.
After U.S. President Donald Trump announced a 25% tariff on autos yesterday, Prime Minister Mark Carney says Canada will match the move. It means a 25% counter tariff on American-made vehicles that are not compliant with the Canada-U.S.-Mexico trade agreement.
And CP24's Lindsay Biscaya joins us live with more on Canada's response. Lindsay.
Yeah, so you mentioned really that main part of those retaliatory measures that Mark Carney announced today, which is the 25% tariff on all of the U.S. imports of vehicles that are not compliant with CUSMA, that trade agreement that Donald Trump actually negotiated himself and promoted in his first term in office. If those vehicles are compliant with CUSMA, then the tariff can be reduced to the percentage of Canadian or Mexican parts that are in said vehicle. Tariffs will not affect auto parts. That comes from Mark Carney, who said his government knows and understands just how integrated our production system is with the U.S. and Mexico. And speaking of Mexico, Carney also said that these tariffs will not be affecting that country at all. This is only to hit back the U.S. where it hurts. Not to mention, Carney also said today that his government is challenging these tariffs in court. He said they have been illegally imposing these tariffs under U.S. law. So the government really, it appears, doing a lot to kind of hit back and defend Canada against these tariffs. Here's more on what Mark Carney had to say today.
The president's actions will reverberate here in Canada and across the world. Three different sets of U.S. tariffs remain in place and will continue to pose significant threats to Canadian workers and Canadian businesses. And while they have been imposed under different premises, some things are consistent. They are all unjustified, unwarranted, and in our judgment, misguided.
I think, Lena and Beatrice, a lot of Canadians are shocked at how fast we're seeing the repercussions of these tariffs. We know that Stellantis plant in Windsor announced last night that it was going to be temporarily shutting down its plant for a couple of weeks to deal with these tariffs. As a result, thousands of people are going to be laid off. And Mark Carney also announced today some kind of relief efforts that the Canadian government is putting into place to help these workers. He said every dollar raised from the counter tariffs, which could be $8 billion after recession, will go directly to auto workers and companies that are affected by these tariffs. And his government is also creating a kind of framework to try to keep auto manufacturers in this country and get some relief from these tariffs if they maintain production in this country, and if they maintain investment in this country. Meanwhile, we're hearing from officials in the White House as well today. We heard from U.S. Secretary of Commerce Howard Lutnick about how this is going and how he doesn't believe that Donald Trump is going to back down anytime soon on these tariffs. Take a listen.
Donald Trump is going to stand firm because he is reordering global trade. Make no mistake about it, America has been exploited, and he is done allowing America to be exploited. And no amount of the exploiters trying to swing harder at us after they've exploited us for all these years is going to change Donald Trump's view.
So the Prime Minister also saying today that if that's the attitude coming from the U.S., which it appears it is, then Canada will be looking to trade more with other like-minded countries, which, of course, Canada has kind of already started talking with Europe specifically about that. And Carney also said today that if the U.S. does not want to lead anymore, then Canada will. And he mentioned once again something we know that the president also mentioned a couple weeks ago, or last week, I believe, after that phone call between Carney and President Donald Trump, which is that after this federal election in this country, whoever the prime minister becomes will have to sit down once again with President Donald Trump and continue negotiations. Back to you for now.
Lindsay Biscay reporting live from the newsroom. Lindsay, thank you. Well, experts in the auto sector are still working to try and make sense of what exactly will be penalized under the new Trump tariffs on vehicles and parts and what will be exempt.
And joining us now to hopefully provide some clarity is Flavio Volpe, president of the Automotive Parts Manufacturers Association. Flavio, good to have you on. Hard to provide clarity when you don't have any. How are you explaining this to Canadians today?
Yeah, that's the point. They're moving so quickly that they're moving ahead of their own department. So they made an announcement, the White House yesterday, that all cars coming into the U.S. are subject to a 25% tariff. Then later in the day, they said, okay, look, if you are, if there's American content in those cars, like the trucks made in that Oshawa plant, then we'll reduce the tariffs by the proportion of that American content. And then they said, it's going to take us 30 days to figure that out. So that's on or before May 3rd. So until then, if you're USMCA compliant Canadian or Mexican parts that are in that vehicle, then you don't have to worry about qualifying those parts. The Prime Minister turned around today and said, hold on, if you're going to import a vehicle from the U.S., then it is subject to tariff, 25%, just the same. If that car has Canadian content in it or Mexican content in it, then you can use that Canadian or Mexican content, if it's 40% or 50%, to reduce that tariff. The Prime Minister being very clear, we're not at a trade war with Mexico and we work well together. He also said any of the money that is collected on those tariffs will flow back to the companies like General Motors that make cars here and then sell cars they make in the U.S. here, if they make a commitment to that footprint. I thought that was a very important distinction to make. And we listened to Howard Lutnick, and I'm reminded that in the first Trump administration, he said only the best people. Well, he must have run out of them. Because Howard Lutnick is talking about exploiters, and he's talking about Canadian car companies are exploiters. Well, he's talking about General Motors, which is a Detroit-based company, last time I checked, who makes cars in Canada and buys parts from the U.S. And he says General Motors is exploiting the U.S., and we're going to save General Motors from itself. This is the logic we're dealing with in this industry, and I feel especially bad for workers at plants like that, or the 12,000 workers at supplier plants who supply plants like that, who are anxious and don't know what to do, and that they look at people like us who are fighting for that footprint in those jobs. And a lot of what we have from the White House is not in writing, and they're making it up on the fly. And we're just hoping they figure out that they've shot themselves in the foot before it's too late.
I mean, Flavio, when you're describing this, how badly are you kind of banging your head against the wall trying to figure out what's going on? I mean, you tweeted, and my favorite part of your tweet was, if you think this is confusing, you're normal, because it can't be easy to digest this news and then try to disseminate to those in the automotive parts industries to try to make sense of, is this going to cost me more? Am I unaffected? Am I still going to have a job? What is going on?
Beatrice, when I started this job, my hair was here, and it's here. And it's the things change every day. And the last time we were at the brink about 30 days ago, it took 2 days for him to pull back. This time he's picked a fight with the entire world. Every car imported into the U.S., and that's 5 million a year from wherever they come from, are subject to a tariff. And then every country around the world except for Canada and Mexico have got reciprocal tariffs, although he spared Russia, that grand ally of ours. He's put tariffs on Antarctic islands that only have penguins. And I think a bunch of us were joking today saying the penguins must have treated them very poorly. It is not what you expect to deal with when you deal with the U.S. government or the Canadian government. It's very hard to predict what to do with investments, what to do with programs and employees. And it has got to be nerve-wracking for people who don't do this for a living, who show up for work to make things and go home and feed their families. So, some of that anxiety is for those people. And, we will not, if this ship goes down, you'll see me standing on the deck holding my breath.
Well, let's hope we can salvage the rest of the hairline as you do that for all the people in this sector. Flavio, thanks so much for your time, for breaking this down as best as you can.
Thank you very much.
Flavio Volpe making sense of the senseless. Thanks so much for this. The future of production at the Stellantis Brampton assembly plant, that is also uncertain.
Let's go live to CP24's Arda Zakarian, who's outside the plant tonight. Listen, anyone in the auto sector who works there, who's involved in it, they're feeling pretty stressed tonight.
Yeah, and people here at the Brampton Stellantis plant, those that worked here also, because this plant is being retooled for the electric Jeep Compass, but that retooling paused on February the 20th for what the company says 8 weeks. We were told by the president of Unifor Local 1285 that this pause is only for this time, that they will begin production again sometime in April, or retooling rather, and then production will begin sometime in October, November, December. However, everybody at this plant, or most people, were removed. 3,000 people work here and 1,000 people supply to this plant. And we are told that very few members are here. So they're confused. I've been told by Unifor's president, Local 1285, that why would they remove all of the people that work here if it is, in fact, the pause? It is for powertrain reasons. And so that, coupled with the tariffs, it really puts this plant in a very vulnerable position. Here's more from Unifor's national president.
They are assessing a number of things with this plant right now. We are told that their commitment to the Brampton plant is as strong as ever. But the reality is there's so much uncertainty out there now. Every single day is about making phone calls for me and pressuring whoever I can to make sure that commitment stays there. And part of what the government did this morning, what the Prime Minister did this morning in terms of sending a signal to the auto industry and the automakers that if you want to have access to our market in Canada, you need to build here. You need to keep your footprint here. You need to continue to have production in this country.
President of Local 1285 tells me that they will do whatever it takes to protect their members, and they want to do what they do best, and that's build cars. And he told me over the phone that one day, very soon, they will build cars in Brampton again. It's just a matter of when. And in the meantime, Premier Doug Ford has said that they will protect auto workers in this province, in this country. Back to you.
All right. Arda Zakarian live in Brampton for us tonight. Thank you, Arda. It is 5:46, 17 degrees, and you're watching Live at 5.
Donald Trump's latest tariff announcement is rocking the markets today. It's the worst day actually on the market since 2020. We'll have reaction coming up with BNN and Bloomberg.
I think it's going very well. It was an operation, like when a patient gets operated on, and it's a big thing. I said this would exactly be the way it is. We have $6 or $7 trillion coming into our country, and we've never seen anything like it. The markets are going to boom, the stock is going to boom, the country is going to boom, and the rest of the world wants to see, is there any way they can make a deal?
Trump's newest set of tariffs rocked the markets today, sending the TSX and Dow both down around 4%. Not good, like the president suggested. The U.S. markets saw their worst day, actually, in 5 years.
And for more on investor concerns, we're joined live by BNN Bloomberg's Mirella Fernandez. Mirella, thanks so much for joining us. Markets really trying to reevaluate the likelihood of a recession. Is that inevitable at this point? What are you hearing from experts?
Yeah, experts are pretty much saying they are looking at a recession for Canada in the second quarter, given everything that's going on, right? The shock wave of the tariff announcement yesterday in Washington started to ripple through overnight, but then when it opened up the markets in North America earlier this morning, things started to shake down in a real way. Let me float some of the numbers for you. The TSX down a whopping 971 points. So again, almost a 4% loss there. The Dow lost 1,600 points, about the same, down about 4% of its value. The NASDAQ lost almost 6% of its value after diving down about 1,000 points. The hit was widespread because the tariffs are widespread. So many countries that feed the U.S. market got hit by those tariffs. Now, Canada got a spare of that overall rate, but of course, we still have tariffs on steel and aluminum, on automobiles, and a couple of other things. So definitely, we are feeling the effects across the board. Investors are worried. They're watching their money sort of disappear on the markets. They're worried about the recession. They're worried about their jobs, so they're also not going to spend a lot of money right now. Big ticket items like cars, which, of course, Canada is now going to tariff coming in from the U.S., well, those are going to cost more. And so people aren't going to want to pay thousands of dollars more for a vehicle. So big ticket spending is also going to be affected. And that is why we're basically headed for a recession, according to most of the economists I've spoken to, for the second quarter.
What are these economists, Mirella, saying when it comes to Donald Trump's frame of mind? I mean, he's a businessman. Historically, he's looked at the markets as kind of an indicator on whether or not he was doing a good job. Certainly in this case, he's suggesting the markets are going to boom. Everything's going to be great. But in the interim, not so much.
Yeah, a lot of people have been scratching their heads. A lot of people who work on the analysts, the portfolio managers are scratching their heads because they know and they knew that tariffs like this are going to hit the markets hard. And Donald Trump sort of chooses the logic he wants to choose at the time that he benefits from it the most. So he's not looking at the markets today. He didn't respond to it. He wants to look down the road saying all of this is going to work out in the end and it's going to work out well for America to bring it back to that golden age. But the economists don't know what he's using to get to that answer, right? To get to that turnaround he expects, because they say once tariffs are put on and then counter tariffs are put on, everybody loses in the long run. So we'll have to see what logic follows, and we'll have to see how long the tariffs stay in place.
Yeah, you have to wonder if he's looking at the same numbers we're looking at. BNN Bloomberg's Mirella Fernandez. Good to chat with you. Thanks, Mirella.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's 5:52. You're watching Live at 5.
Is the trade war having an impact on the federal election campaign? We're going to talk about that and take a look at the latest poll numbers. Stay with us.
Latest Nanos poll for CTV News and Globe and Mail showing 50% of respondents want Liberal leader Mark Carney to be Prime Minister.
While Carney has the support of half of respondents, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre's support has dropped more than a point to 32.8%. You'll see that support for NDP leader Jagmeet Singh is down more than half a point to less than 5%. And the rest of the federal party leaders included in the poll have seen a slight uptick in support.
When it comes to overall party support, the Liberals have more than 9-point lead over the Conservatives, with the Liberals up slightly, the Tories down. The NDP is down almost half a point to 8.8%. The Bloc Québécois has 5.5%. The Green Party has 1.7%, and the People's Party of Canada is at 1.1%.
5:56, 17 degrees. This is Live at 5.
SickKids Hospital is celebrating a milestone. It's 150th year. We'll have more on that after the break.
Welcome back. SickKids Hospital is celebrating a pretty big milestone today. It's 150th year.
It is the pillar of pediatric care, and it was launched back on April 3rd, 1875 by Elizabeth McMaster and a group of Toronto women. Since then, the Hospital for Sick Children has grown to be ranked the #1 publicly funded children's hospital in the world. A special celebration will be held at Nathan Phillips Square on June 7th.
It's 5:59 now. 17 degrees out there. Lots of sunshine. Gorgeous day. This is Toronto's breaking news. CP24.
We're live outside the GM plant in Oshawa tonight. The auto sector in this country facing massive uncertainty as Trump's tariffs kick in today. Thanks so much for spending your hour with us.
CTV News at 6 is coming up next.